I wasn't supposed to be home that day. I just closed a big deal, big enough that my boss patted me on the back and insisted I take a day off. So, I decided to surprise Camila. 20 years together, and she'd always loved surprises, or so I thought. When I walked through the door, something felt off. The air smelled different, cologne I didn't recognize mixed with our vanilla-scented candles. I called out her name, but all I heard was muffled laughter from upstairs. My heart dropped. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about the sound made my chest tighten. My legs carried me up the stairs, each step slower than the last. As I got closer to our bedroom, the laughter turned into whispers. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, paralyzed. I pushed the door open. Camila was in bed with a man I'd never seen before. He had the nerve to smirk at me like he owned the place. For a second, everything froze. My mind raced, replaying 2 decades of memories. The vacations, the arguments, the nights spent holding each other during storms, all of it felt like a lie. Max. It's not what it looks like. Camila shrieked, pulling the sheets around her. I didn't say a word. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Camila lunged for me, screaming, "What are you doing? Stop it!" But I kept snapping. Her lover scrambled to grab his clothes, mumbling something about it being a mistake. A mistake? That's what they called it? I walked out of the room, shaking, my hand gripping the phone like a lifeline. Downstairs, I paced, trying to catch my breath. My world was crumbling, but I needed to stay calm to think. 20 years. 20 years down the drain. But I wasn't about to let her rewrite the story. I had the evidence. This was just the beginning. Sat in the kitchen, staring at the pictures on my phone, hands trembling. Camila came downstairs, draped in a robe, her face pale. She looked like she was about to cry, but I couldn't tell if it was guilt, fear, or anger. Maybe all 3. "Max, please. Let me explain," she said, her voice cracking. She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. I couldn't stomach her touch. "Explain what, Camila? Explain why I walked into our home, our bedroom, and saw you with another man." My voice was calm, too calm, and that scared me. "It's not what you think. It didn't mean anything," she whispered. I laughed bitterly. "It didn't mean anything? You've been lying to me, betraying me, and you say it didn't mean anything? Do you think that makes it better?" She started crying, the kind of tears I used to rush to wipe away. But now they felt hollow, like a performance. "I've been stressed, Max. You're always working, always away." I felt lonely. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Lonely? "Camila, I've worked hard for us, for this house, for this life. And while I was out building a future for us, you were here, doing this." She didn't have an answer. Just more tears. The man, her lover, poked his head around the corner. "Hey, maybe I should go. You think?" I snapped, my voice finally rising. "Get out of my house. Now." He grabbed his jacket and bolted, muttering something I didn't care to hear. Camila started to speak again, but I held up my hand. "Save it. I'm done listening." I left the house and drove aimlessly, my head spinning. Every street looked unfamiliar, every turn felt wrong. Eventually, I parked at the edge of a park we used to visit when we were younger. I sat there, staring at the evidence on my phone. What was I supposed to do now? I couldn't just bury this. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the years, the trust, the sacrifices. 20 years of my life reduced to lies. As the sun set, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. If she wanted to tear down everything we'd built, I'd make sure she faced the consequences. I texted a lawyer I'd heard about through a friend. I didn't know where this was headed yet, but I knew one thing. Camila wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my car, phone in hand, scrolling through old photos of us. Vacations, birthdays, lazy Sundays on the couch. Our life together played out in a slideshow that felt more like a cruel joke. Around 6 a.m., I drove back to the house. The lights were off, and for a moment, I wondered if Camila had left. But when I walked in, I saw her curled up on the couch, clutching a pillow. She looked up, her eyes swollen from crying. "Max, can we please talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I set my bag down, ignoring her as I walked to the kitchen. I needed coffee, something to clear the fog in my head. As the machine whirred, I could feel her watching me, waiting for a chance to plead her case. "Max, I made a mistake," she said, following me into the kitchen. "A terrible mistake. But it doesn't have to end like this." "Like what, Camila?" I asked, finally turning to face her. "You think we can just go back to how things were? That I can forget what I saw?" "I don't expect you to forget," she said quickly, desperation creeping into her tone. "But I love you. I always have. I messed up, but we can fix this." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Fix this? You don't just fix 20 years of marriage when someone decides to throw it away." She stepped closer, reaching for my hand, but I pulled back. Her face fell. "It wasn't like that, Max. I didn't plan this. It just happened." "That's the part one can't wrap my head around," I said, my voice shaking. "How does something like this just happen? Were you bored? Lonely? Or was he just more exciting than me?" Her lip quivered. "I don't know, okay?" I was confused. Confused. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "You weren't confused when you invited him into our bed." She flinched at that, and for a second, I felt guilty. But then the anger came rushing back. "I'm going to need some space," I said, my tone final. "I'll stay in the guest room until I figure out what to do next. And don't try to talk to me unless it's important." Her face crumpled, but I turned and walked away. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. Later that day, I started gathering more evidence. I went through phone bills, credit card statements, even our shared laptop. The patterns were there: long phone calls when I was away, charges at restaurants I'd never been to, late-night text messages. Every piece I uncovered felt like another stab to the heart. As I worked, I found myself thinking back to the good times. Our first date, the way she laughed when I proposed, the night we danced in the kitchen to no music. It was like grieving a death, except the person wasn't gone. They'd just chosen to destroy everything we had. When I went to bed that night in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever be able to sleep in my own bed again. The guest room felt like a prison. The bed was stiff, the air stifling, and every creak in the house reminded me of the life I was trying to escape. I barely slept, my mind racing with questions. Who was he? How long had this been going on? Was this the first time, or just the first time I caught her? The next morning, I called my lawyer, a guy named Brian, who came highly recommended. He didn't sugarcoat anything. "Max, divorces involving infidelity can get messy. If you want to come out of this with some dignity and a fair settlement, you'll need to be smart about it. That means collecting evidence and keeping your emotions in check." I told him about the pictures, the phone bills, and the receipts. He seemed impressed. "Good. Keep gathering what you can. And Max? Don't let her know what you're planning." After the call, I spent the day digging deeper. I found her emails and saw a recurring name, Jake. My stomach churned. There were dozens of messages, some flirty, others downright explicit. They'd been meeting for months, often when I was out of town for work. I scrolled through, feeling my anger grow with every word. It wasn't just physical. They'd shared jokes, dreams, plans. She'd told him things she used to tell me. It felt like she'd replaced me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of us. That evening, I confronted her. "Who's Jake?" I asked, standing in the doorway of the living room. Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Camila. I saw the emails. The texts. You've been seeing him for months, haven't you?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Finally, she said, "I didn't mean for you to find out this way." "This way?" I laughed bitterly. "How many ways are there to find out your wife's been cheating on you?" "Max, it wasn't like that. I never wanted to hurt you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But you did." "Over and over again," I said, my voice rising. "You lied to me, Camila. Every time I called you from out of town, every time you kissed me goodbye, you were lying. Do you even feel guilty, or is this just an act?" She broke down then, collapsing onto the couch. "I don't know why I did it," she sobbed. "Jake made me feel noticed, important, like I mattered." I stared at her, my anger mixing with a deep, crushing sadness. "You mattered to me, Camila. For 20 years, you were everything to me. But I guess that wasn't enough for you." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. Not this time. After she went to bed, I sent Jake an email from her account. It was petty, I know, but I needed to do it. Jake, this is Max, Camila's husband. I know everything. I hope she was worth destroying a family for. I hit send and immediately felt a strange mix of satisfaction and regret. It wouldn't change anything, but at least he'd know I wasn't blind to their betrayal. The next morning, I checked her email. Jake had replied. Max, I'm sorry you had to find out like this. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. What happened between me and Camila wasn't planned, but feelings developed. I won't contact her again. I hope you both find peace. Peace? The audacity. I stared at the screen, my hand gripping the mouse so tightly my knuckles turned white. This wasn't some mistake. It was a deliberate betrayal, wrapped up in pretty words to ease their guilt. I forwarded the message to my lawyer. Evidence, Brian called it. But to me, it was just another dagger in my chest. Camila didn't ask why I was so quiet at breakfast. She just sat there, picking at her food, her eyes darting toward me like she was waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I decided to focus on myself. I went for a run, something I hadn't done in years. The cold air burned my lungs, but it was better than sitting in that house, drowning in memories. Every step felt like I was running away from the life I thought I had. When I got back, Camila was sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Max, I don't know what to say anymore, she said softly. Then don't, I replied, walking past her. Actions speak louder than words, and yours said enough. Later that day, I got a call from our daughter, Lily. She's in college, halfway across the country, and had no idea what was happening. Hey Dad. You sound weird. Everything okay? She asked, her voice light and cheerful. I hesitated. How do you tell your child that her mother has destroyed the family? Yes, sweetheart, just a lot on my mind. How's school? We talked for a while about her classes, her friends, and her plans for winter break. Every word felt like a lie. I couldn't tell her, not yet. She adored her mom, and this would shatter her. But she'd have to know eventually. That night, I sat in the guest room, staring at the ceiling again. Camila was in the master bedroom, and the space between us felt like a chasm. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Brian. Max, I've drafted a preliminary separation agreement. Take a look and let me know your thoughts. We'll be ready to proceed whenever you're ready. It felt surreal. 20 years, reduced to legal jargon and numbered clauses. I stared at the document, my chest tightening with each line. Splitting assets, deciding who gets what. It felt like dividing a corpse, piece by piece. But then I thought of Jake, and the anger returned. I wasn't going to let Camila walk away from this without consequences. The next day, I decided to leave the house. Being under the same roof as Camila was suffocating, and I needed to clear my head. I drove to a diner I used to visit during long work trips, quiet, out of the way, with the best coffee in town. I sat in a corner booth, sipping my coffee and scrolling through the separation agreement on my phone. The legal language was cold and detached, but it spelled out my next steps: division of property, financial disclosures, and the clause that mattered most to me, proof of infidelity. Brian was adamant about this. If you're going to make this a clean break, you need to establish grounds for divorce, he'd said. The photos, emails, and text logs were all lined up. I hated how clinical it felt, but I wasn't about to leave anything to chance. When I got back home, Camila was waiting for me in the living room. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept since the confrontation. Max, can we talk? She asked hesitantly. Depends, I said, setting my keys on the counter. Are you ready to be honest, or is this another round of excuses? Her shoulders slumped. I'm not making excuses. I want to try to explain. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Go ahead. Explain. She took a deep breath. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. What happened with Jake, it wasn't about replacing you. I was stupid, and I let myself get caught up in something that didn't matter. But you do matter, Max. You always have. Her words should have meant something, but they felt hollow. If I matter so much, why wasn't I enough? Tears welled up in her eyes. I don't know. I think I lost myself somewhere along the way. You were working so much, and I started to feel invisible. Jake noticed me, and I was weak. That's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I shook my head. You felt invisible? Camila, I've spent 20 years trying to build a life for us, a life you wanted. If that made you feel invisible, then maybe you should have told me instead of finding comfort in someone else. I know, she whispered, wiping her eyes. I know I screwed up. But I don't want to lose us, Max. Please. We can go to counseling, work through this. I'll do whatever it takes. I stared at her, my heart a mix of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. Counseling won't erase what you did. It won't bring back the trust you broke. And honestly, I don't think I want to fix this. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remember the emails, the nights I'd spent working late while she was with him, and the way she'd lied to my face. That night, I made my decision. I sent Brian a message. Let's move forward with the separation. I'm ready. It was time to take control of my life again. Camila had made her choices, and now I was making mine. The days that followed felt like a slow-motion collapse. I stayed in the guest room, barely speaking to Camila except for logistical questions. She tried a few times to start a conversation, but I shut her down every time. I couldn't stomach the thought of hashing it out again. Brian had set the wheels in motion. He drafted the official petition for divorce and outlined the steps for serving Camila the papers. The thought of it felt both liberating and suffocating. This was what I wanted, needed, but it was still hard to believe my marriage was ending. One evening, as I was sorting through old documents in the office, Camila knocked on the door. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I didn't look up. "What do you need?" I need to know if this is really it," she said, stepping inside. "If there's no chance for us." I sighed, setting the papers down. "Camila, do you really think there's a chance? After everything you've done?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. "I don't know. I keep hoping you'll see that I'm sorry, that I want to fix this." Her words hit a nerve. "Sorry isn't enough," I said, my voice rising. "You didn't just break a promise, Camila. You broke me. And now you want me to act like we can just patch things up? It doesn't work that way." "I know I hurt you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But we've been through so much together. Doesn't that count for anything?" "It did," I said coldly. "But you threw it away the moment you decided to let him into our life." She stood there, looking like she wanted to say more, but finally, she just nodded and left the room. The next day, I made arrangements to move out. I found a short-term rental across town, nothing fancy, but it would give me the space I needed. Camila looked devastated when I told her. "Please don't do this," she begged. "Stay. We can figure it out." I shook my head. "You made your choices, Camila. Now I'm making mine." Her face crumpled, and for a second, I almost faltered. But then I remembered Jake's emails, the lies, the betrayal. I couldn't stay. Not anymore. The first night in the rental was surreal. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, and the silence deafening. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. This was my space, free from the reminders of what I'd lost. That night, I made a list. A simple list of things I wanted to focus on: my health, my work, my relationship with Lily. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next morning, Camila called. I debated whether to answer but decided it was better to deal with her now than drag it out. "Max," she said, her voice shaky. "I just wanted to let you know. I've started looking for a therapist. For myself." I was surprised but kept my tone neutral. "That's good. You need it." "I'm doing it for us," she added quickly. "In case there's ever a chance." "There won't be," I interrupted. "Do it for yourself, Camila. Not for me." The line went silent for a moment, and then she said, "Okay. I'll let you go." As I hung up, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a flicker of hope. Not for reconciliation, but for the possibility of moving forward. For both of us. A week after moving out, I called Lily. I couldn't put it off any longer. She deserved to know the truth, as much as I hated the idea of shattering her image of her mom. "Hey, Dad. What's up?" she answered cheerfully. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Do you have a minute? There's something we need to talk about." "Oh," she joked. "This sounds serious." "It is," I admitted. "It's about your mom and me." There was a pause. "You're scaring me." What's going on? I took a deep breath and told her everything. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I didn't go into graphic detail either. I explained that her mom had been unfaithful, that I'd moved out, and that we were starting the process of divorce. The silence on the other end felt endless. Finally, she said, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said softly. "I just thought you should hear it from me." "How's Mom?" she asked, her voice wavering. "She's struggling," I admitted. "I think she's realizing how much damage she's done." "I can't believe this," Lily said, her voice breaking. "You guys always seemed so solid." "So did I said bitterly. We talked a little longer, but the conversation was heavy and strained. When we hung up, I felt like I'd just run a marathon. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but at least the truth was out. A few days later, Camila called to tell me Lily had reached out to her. "She's upset," Camila said, her voice tired. "She thinks I've ruined everything." "She's not wrong," I said bluntly. Camila sighed. I don't know how to fix this." "You can't," I said. "Not this time." She didn't argue. Instead, she just said, "I hope you're doing okay." "I'm fine," I lied. One night, while going through some old boxes, I found our wedding album. I hadn't meant to keep it. I thought I'd left all the sentimental stuff at the house, but there it was, tucked away among forgotten keepsakes. I flipped through the pages, seeing younger versions of ourselves smiling, laughing, looking at each other like we had the whole world ahead of us. It felt like I was looking at strangers. I thought about throwing it away, but something stopped me. Instead, I put it back in the box and shoved it into the back of the closet. I wasn't ready to let it go, even if it was just a reminder of what I'd lost. The next day, I got a call from Brian. "Max, we've received a response from her attorney. They're requesting mediation." "Mediation?" I asked, surprised. "It's standard," Brian explained. "It's a chance to negotiate terms without going to court. But it also means facing her directly. Are you up for that?" I didn't answer right away. The thought of sitting across from Camila, hashing out the end of our marriage, made my stomach churn. But I knew it was inevitable. "Yeah," I said finally. "Let's do it." The mediation was scheduled for the following week. I spent the days leading up to it preparing, mentally and emotionally. Brian walked me through the process, reminding me to stay calm and focused. "Stick to the facts," he said. "Don't let emotions derail you." When the day came, I arrived early, sitting in the car outside the office building. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I took deep breaths, trying to steady myself. I wasn't ready to see her, but I didn't have a choice. When I finally walked into the conference room, Camila was already there, sitting across the table with her attorney. She looked up at me, her eyes red and tired, but I avoided her gaze. Brian nudged me gently, and we took our seats. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor, started by laying out the rules. "This is a space for constructive conversation," she said. "The goal is to reach an agreement that works for both parties." I wanted to laugh. How could there be anything constructive about this? But I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Camila spoke first. Her voice was shaky but firm. "Max, I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to be fair. I don't want this to turn into a battle." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that she was the one who'd started this war. Instead, I let Brian handle it, outlining my terms. I wanted the house, a fair division of assets, and an acknowledgement of her infidelity. Her attorney countered, arguing for a more equal split. The conversation went back and forth, growing more tense with each passing minute. At one point, Camila interrupted. "Max, please. We don't have to fight like this." I looked at her, my anger bubbling to the surface. "This isn't a fight, Camila. This is me cleaning up the mess you made." Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. The mediator quickly steered the conversation back on track, and we spent the next 2 hours hashing out the details. By the end of it, we'd reached a tentative agreement. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to move forward. When the session ended, Camila approached me in the hallway. "Max, can I talk to you for a minute? Alone?" I hesitated, then nodded. Brian gave me a look, but I waved him off. She led me to a quieter corner, wringing her hands nervously. "I just wanted to say, thank you. For not making this harder than it already is." I crossed my arms, keeping my tone cold. "Don't thank me, Camila. I'm doing this for me, not for you. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope someday you can forgive me. I stared at her, the woman I'd loved for 20 years, and felt a pang of sadness. I don't know if I can. But I hope you find a way to forgive yourself. Her lip quivered, but she didn't say anything. After a moment, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there alone. That night, I sat in my rental, staring out the window. The mediation was a step toward closure, but the weight of everything still pressed down on me. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: I wasn't going back. The mediation was scheduled for the following week. I spent the days leading up to it preparing, mentally and emotionally. Brian walked me through the process, reminding me to stay calm and focused. Stick to the facts, he said. Don't let emotions derail you. When the day came, I arrived early, sitting in the car outside the office building. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I took deep breaths, trying to steady myself. I wasn't ready to see her, but I didn't have a choice. When I finally walked into the conference room, Camila was already there, sitting across the table with her attorney. She looked up at me, her eyes red and tired, but I avoided her gaze. Brian nudged me gently, and we took our seats. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor, started by laying out the rules. This is a space for constructive conversation, she said. The goal is to reach an agreement that works for both parties. I wanted to laugh. How could there be anything constructive about this? But I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Camila spoke first. Her voice was shaky but firm. Max, I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to be fair. I don't want this to turn into a battle. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that she was the one who'd started this war. Instead, I let Brian handle it, outlining my terms. I wanted the house, a fair division of assets, and an acknowledgement of her infidelity. Her attorney countered, arguing for a more equal split. The conversation went back and forth, growing more tense with each passing minute. At one point, Camila interrupted. Max, please. We don't have to fight like this. I looked at her, my anger bubbling to the surface. This isn't a fight, Camila. This is me cleaning up the mess you made. Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. The mediator quickly steered the conversation back on track, and we spent the next 2 hours hashing out the details. By the end of it, we'd reached a tentative agreement. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to move forward. When the session ended, Camila approached me in the hallway. Max, can I talk to you for a minute? Alone. I hesitated, then nodded. Brian gave me a look, but I waved him off. She led me to a quieter corner, wringing her hands nervously. I just wanted to say, thank you, for not making this harder than it already is. I crossed my arms, keeping my tone cold. Don't thank me, Camila. I'm doing this for me, not for you. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope someday you can forgive me. I stared at her, the woman I'd loved for 20 years, and felt a pang of sadness. I don't know if I can. But I hope you find a way to forgive yourself. Her lip quivered, but she didn't say anything. After a moment, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there alone. That night, I sat in my rental, staring out the window. The mediation was a step toward closure, but the weight of everything still pressed down on me. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: I wasn't going back. The first month alone was an adjustment. I kept busy with work and hobbies, anything to avoid the empty spaces that echoed with memories of her. The house felt too big, but it was mine now, and I needed to reclaim it. Lily visited for a weekend. It was good to have her around, even if the conversations about how I was doing were hard. She offered to help redecorate, which led to laughter as we painted the living room a bold shade of blue, her idea. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd never thought I'd do. Talking helped, even if it was slow progress. The anger, the sadness, it all needed an outlet, and the sessions gave me that. Camila's texts became less frequent. At first, I ignored them, but eventually, I blocked her number. I didn't need the reminders. Little by little, life began to stabilize. I wasn't fully healed, but I could see a path forward. It was time to start living for myself again. Weeks turned into months, and the routine of life slowly began to feel normal again. I found comfort in the small things: morning coffee on the porch, finishing a woodworking project, or catching up with old friends I'd neglected over the years. Lily called regularly, her support a constant source of strength. She didn't bring up her mom often, and I didn't ask. We both knew it was a wound that needed time. One day, I received an unexpected email. It was from Jake. "Max, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I regret everything that happened. I've lost more than I ever imagined because of my actions. I hope you're finding peace." I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. In the end, I deleted it. Jake's regret wasn't my burden. I began venturing out more, reconnecting with life beyond the walls of my house. At the woodworking class, I met new people, nothing serious, but it felt good to be social again. For the first time in a long time, I felt like Max, not just the man who'd been betrayed. As time went on, I realized that healing wasn't a straight line. Some days, I felt like I was moving forward, laughing with friends, building something in my workshop, or cooking a meal that wasn't just reheated takeout. Other days, I'd find myself staring at old photos or replaying conversations, the pain hitting like it was brand new. One evening, I decided to host a small gathering at the house. It was something I hadn't done in years, but I wanted to fill the space with new memories. I invited a few close friends, some from work, and even a couple of neighbors I barely knew. The night was better than I expected. The house buzzed with conversation and laughter, and for a few hours, I didn't feel the weight of the past. As the evening wound down, one of the neighbors, a woman named Claire, stayed behind to help clean up. "You've got a nice place," she said, stacking plates in the sink. "Feels like a home." "Thanks," I replied, a little awkwardly. "It's been a work in progress." "Well, you're doing a good job," she said with a smile. There was something warm and genuine about her, but I wasn't ready to think about anything beyond friendship. Still, it was nice to feel noticed, like maybe I wasn't completely invisible after all. In therapy, I started unpacking not just the betrayal but the cracks in the relationship that I'd ignored for years. My therapist helped me see that while Camila's choices were her own, I'd also played a role in our marriage drifting apart. That realization was hard to swallow, but it was also freeing. It meant I could grow from this, learn from it, and maybe even find happiness again. A few weeks later, Lily came home for a long weekend. We spent the days catching up, playing board games, and cooking meals together. She even dragged me to a yoga class, laughing at my attempts to keep up with the poses. "I think you're getting the hang of it, Dad," she teased as I wobbled in Warrior 2. "More like Warrior 1.5, I joked, and we both burst out laughing. On her last night home, Lily brought up something I hadn't expected. "Have you thought about dating again?" she asked, her tone cautious. I paused, caught off guard. "Not really. I'm just focused on getting my life back on track." "That makes sense," she said, twirling her fork in her pasta. "But, you deserve to be happy, Dad. Whenever you're ready." Her words stuck with me long after she left. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but it was the first time I'd even considered the possibility. One day, while sanding a piece of wood in my workshop, I found myself smiling. It wasn't a big moment, nothing dramatic, just a quiet realization that the pain didn't feel as sharp anymore. The house didn't feel so empty. The future didn't feel so daunting. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope that a few months after the dust had settled, life started to take on a rhythm again. I wasn't entirely whole, I wasn't sure if I ever would be, but I was beginning to feel like myself. The house had changed, too. New furniture replaced pieces that Camila and I had picked out together, and Lily's bold blue living room walls gave the place a fresh energy. It felt like a house that belonged to me, not a shared space haunted by old memories. One weekend, Claire, the neighbor who'd stayed late after my gathering, knocked on my door with a bottle of wine. "I figured you might want a break from your projects," she said, glancing past me at the tools and wood shavings scattered in my entryway. I laughed, stepping aside to let her in. "You're not wrong. Come in." We spent the evening talking over glasses of Merlot. Claire shared stories about her work as a landscape architect, her love for hiking, and her frustration with her overzealous golden retriever Milo, who apparently had a knack for eating socks. I told her about Lily, my woodworking projects, and cautiously, a little about the divorce. "I can't imagine how hard that must have been," she said softly. "But you seem resilient." "Not sure if resilient is the word I'd use," I said, swirling my glass. "More like stubborn." "Well, stubborn works too," she said with a smile. After that night, Claire and I started spending more time together. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but there was a natural ease to our conversations that I hadn't felt in years. She didn't pry about my past, and I didn't ask much about hers. It was simple, and for now, that was enough. Meanwhile, Lily continued to be a steady presence in my life. She called frequently, updating me on her classes, her friends, and the latest drama in her dorm. During one call, she casually mentioned visiting a therapist herself. "I figured if you can do it, I can too," she said. "It's been helpful, you know? Working through everything with Mom. How's that going?" I asked carefully. She sighed. "It's complicated. I love her, but I'm still angry. I don't know if that'll ever go away." "That's okay," I said. "Feel what you need to feel. There's no right way to handle this." "Thanks, Dad," she said, her voice softer. "And thanks for always being honest with me. It's helped more than you know." One afternoon, as I was finishing a bookshelf I'd been building, I got a text from Camila. I hadn't heard from her since the divorce was finalized. Seeing her name on my phone sent a wave of conflicting emotions through me. "Hi, Max. I hope this isn't unwelcome. I just wanted to say thank you for how you handled everything. I know I didn't deserve your patience, but I'm grateful for it. I'm working on myself, like you said I should. I hope you're doing okay." I stared at the message for a while, unsure of how to respond, or if I should respond at all. Eventually, I decided on something simple. "Thanks for letting me know. I hope you find what you're looking for." I hit send and put my phone down, feeling an odd mix of relief and closure. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step toward letting go. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself saying yes to things I would have avoided before. I joined a hiking group on Claire's recommendation and discovered a love for the outdoors. I signed up for a local charity event and spent a weekend building homes for families in need. I even accepted an invitation to a coworker's wedding, where I danced for the first time in years. One night, after a particularly grueling hike, Claire and I sat on a rocky outcrop overlooking the city lights below. Milo was sprawled out beside us, panting happily. "This isn't so bad, huh?" she said, nudging me with her shoulder. "Not bad at all," I agreed, glancing at her. For a moment, the silence between us felt heavy, charged. I wasn't sure if I was ready to step into something new, but the idea didn't scare me as much as it once had. Maybe that was progress. Later, as I lay in bed, I thought about the man I was becoming. I wasn't just a husband who'd been betrayed or a father trying to hold his family together. I was rediscovering who I was, what I wanted, what I valued, and what made me happy. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. Life had settled into a manageable rhythm. I was no longer just surviving, I was living. Each day felt a little lighter, and for the first time in years, I looked forward to the future instead of fearing it. But the thing about life is, just when you think you've found your footing, it finds a way to pull the rug out from under you. It started with a phone call. It was a Sunday evening, and I'd just finished staining a table I'd been working on. The phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't have answered, but something compelled me to pick up. "Hello," I said cautiously. There was a pause on the other end, and then a man's voice spoke. "Is this Max?" "Yes." "Who's this?" "This is Jake." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't heard it in months, not since the email he'd sent me after the affair came to light. My grip on the phone tightened. "Why are you calling me?" "I wouldn't be if it wasn't important," he said quickly, his tone almost frantic. "I need to talk to you. It's about Camila." My stomach churned. "What about her?" "She's in trouble," he said. "Serious trouble. And I think you're the only one who can help." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. Curiosity and a lingering sense of responsibility tugged at me, even though every instinct told me to walk away. We met at a coffee shop on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. Jake looked nothing like I remembered from the photos. He was disheveled, his face pale, and his hands jittered as he nursed a cup of coffee. He looked up as I approached, his eyes wide and filled with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe. "What do you want?" I asked, sitting down across from him. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice low. I didn't know who else to turn to. "Get to the point," I snapped. "Why are you dragging me into this?" "It's Camila," he said, leaning forward. "I haven't talked to her since the divorce, I swear. But a few weeks ago, I started getting these messages. Weird, cryptic things. At first, I ignored them, but then one of them mentioned her by name. I frowned. Messages? From who? I don't know, he admitted. But whoever it is, they know about the affair. About everything. And they're threatening her. My chest tightened. Threatening her how? They're saying she needs to pay for what she's done. That she's going to get what she deserves. He paused, his voice trembling. Max, this person knows things. Details that only someone close to her would know. I leaned back, my mind racing. Why are you telling me this? If someone's threatening her, she can go to the police. She's scared, he said. She thinks they'll just brush it off as some crazy ex or something. And honestly, I think she's right. But this person is serious. I think she's in danger. I stared at him, trying to read his expression. Was this some kind of twisted ploy to drag me back into Camila's life? Or was he telling the truth? Either way, I needed answers. Do you have the messages? I asked. Jake nodded, pulling out his phone. He slid it across the table, and I scrolled through the texts. They were as unsettling as he described. Vague threats mixed with unsettling personal details about Camila, me, and even Lily. My stomach turned as I read them. Why are they targeting you? I asked, my voice cold. I think they're trying to scare me into confessing more about the affair, he said. But I already told you everything. There's nothing else. I didn't believe him, but I knew I couldn't ignore this. If Camila's in danger, she needs to handle this herself, I said, sliding the phone back to him. I'm not her husband anymore. Jake looked desperate. Max, I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything, but please. I can't do this alone. Something in his tone made me pause. Despite everything, there was a sliver of truth in his words. This wasn't about forgiveness or second chances, it was about doing what was right. That night, I called Camila. Hearing her voice again was like reopening an old wound. Max, she said, her tone hesitant. Why are you calling? Jake told me what's going on, I said bluntly. Why didn't you come to me? There was a long silence. Because I didn't think you'd care, she said finally. Not after everything I've done. I care because Lily's name came up, I said sharply. And if she's involved in this, I need to know. Her breath hitched. Lily? No. She doesn't have anything to do with this. Then who does? I demanded. Her voice broke. I don't know, Max. I don't know who would do this. Over the next few days, the messages escalated. Jake received a note taped to his door, and Camila found her tires slashed. The police brushed it off as a random act of vandalism, but we knew better. Whoever this was, they were getting closer. Then one night, I found a letter in my mailbox. No name, no return address. Just a single sheet of paper with 5 words written in blocky, uneven handwriting. You're not as innocent, Mac. The weight of the words settled over me like a heavy blanket. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. Whoever was behind this wasn't just targeting Camila and Jake, they were coming for me too. The question wasn't why. It was who.